Welcome to the latest installment of Brandon Brothers. I'm Doug.
And I'm Johnny. Today we're talking about the ethics of generative AI.
All right, let's get to it.
And we're back. Doug.
John.
So we've been building up for a little while about that we had this AI sort of ethics framework that we had been working on. I believe we've
Yes.
mentioned it because our follower has been really patiently waiting for this big reveal. And it's
Well, but we can't just have a reveal, right? We kind of need to talk about how we got here.
and you're right. And so why don't you take us back to where we really first started discussing or you kind of expressed to me that you had some trepidation
Right.
over whether or not it was ethical for you specifically to use AI in your capacity as a owner, co-owner of a agency who is doing work on behalf of your clients, and
Right.
where and you were grappling, wrestling, if you will, internally and discussing with me and other colleagues about where this line was, what was ethical to do, what did you have to disclose, like all these things. So tell me where it started.
So it all started with the co-founder of the agency that we have, Remixed. And so Simon is our chief creative officer, and he is an early adopter. He's the one who got the agency aligned correctly when it comes to like web development, for example. And he was the one who spearheaded our mobile first, for example. So of course, it's no surprise that he would also be on the forefront of creative utilizing tools like generative AI. And so speaking of, calling it a tool, that's where I've ultimately landed. But there was a day in particular, like a couple of years ago, where uh, I happened to be in your neck of the woods, and I reached out and was like, "Hey, you want to meet up for coffee?" And while we were meeting up for coffee, as I'm sure you recall,
It was at what, Russo's?
Rosso.
Rosso.
Yes.
Shout out to Rosso's,
Yeah.
Lake Mary. No,
Longwood. Yep.
Longwood. Yeah, 434.
Really good coffee.
Yeah,
So they're not even paying for
I
this.
know, I know.
We'll
Shoot,
show this to them and be like, "Hey,
look how
can
many.
we get a cappuccino?" Uh, so, so yeah, it while we're having coffee, I'm like, "Hey, I'm on the fence about something, and I need you to knock me off the fence." And so that something was generative AI, because, like you were mentioning, I have concerns about the use. It's not past tense. It's present tense and future tense, that I have continuing concerns about the idea of utilizing generative AI when it comes to the development and delivery of creative that is solicited by a paying client, right? But it obviously goes beyond that. As a creative, like, there are things that I just care about ethically, right? I don't want to steal someone else's ideas, not just because you're talking about IP infringement, but I endeavor to be creative. I want to be original.
Right. So you're saying it's there's a distinction because there is stuff that, it may be illegal, but that doesn't necessarily make it right.
Right. Yeah. So really, in this realm, it was establishing, am I using content that I'm allowed to be using, right? So where did that where's the source data that is being mined? So that was a really big concern. But the crux of this, I think was really with Adobe Firefly, right? Because that kind of started to mitigate that concern about where the content came from. Um, So I think that's kind of the origin story
Sure.
of where we began. And then I think you started asking questions like, well, what are the important points to make sure that you're not violating?
Yeah, like what would be your criteria to say, well, if it's, for example, Adobe uses they started using generative AI inside all of their tools, but it started with Firefly. Or is
Well,
that
it
the
ac-
name of their tool?
so
Or
so
I'm not sure.
Firefly is when it became truly generative where you could use a prompt.
Right.
However, I would say that we had precursors to that when you were looking at like expanding a background, for example.
Mm.
So it was able to generate these backgrounds that match. So for all intents and purposes, it was generative AI, but it was using the source data that was right there in front of you to create the extra
So you
pieces.
like an example would be you've got maybe a relatively tight photo shot of a person and you wanted to make it look like that they were in a big field.
Right,
Okay.
exactly, and so it could basically look at the scene and figure out
Okay.
what it needed to kind of duplicate, but also offset to make it look real.
Gotcha. And so that begs the question. So it seems like there's another layer there too, because if you're using the generative AI, there's a question about ethics as far as disclosure
Sure.
to your client. You don't typically disclose to them how you're building their website and what tools you use. You don't disclose that you used Illustrator
Right.
or
They don't
yeah.
care that we use Adobe products,
Right,
right?
right.
They might care if we used things like, um shoot, I can't even remember the name of the software. There's some crappy software that's out there that's become universal. But
Oh,
anyhow, Canva,
Canvas?
yeah, Canva,
Canva,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. They might care if we're using that crap, but Adobe is kind of a standard bearer, so
Sure.
it would be it's as expected as a screwdriver is in your tool bag, right? So and what we're talking about is okay, well, maybe generative AI is akin to a power screwdriver, right?
Mm.
Except it can do way more than that. And so
It's like one of those multi-tool
it it
things.
it is a Swiss Army knife of sorts in the creative process, but the question is, where does it belong in the creative process? And that's something that I was also grappling with. The other component that I was grappling with was, is this going to replace someone? Do designers just become creative directors? And is that a sufficient replacement? Like when it comes to what we're doing, it's reskilling, right? Do designers just become visual design engineers? And how do they know that they're creating the right thing without the experience that's required of an actual practicing designer?
Well, some of the kids these days would say that prompt engineering is creative. Would you agree?
To a limited extent. I mean, as someone who has been a creative director, my job was to ideate and write creative briefs, right? Can you use ChatGPT to do that? Absolutely.
Right.
Is it probably going to be shit? Yeah, right? Because it just doesn't have the important elements. For example, it's not very good at being able to gauge what is going to affect emotion, right? It's not very good at doing things like double entendre, right? And so you run into all of these limitations that a skilled technician is still required. So how do you manage that in the creative workflow? So that was another reason I was on the fence going, this isn't a bad thing. This could be really amazing, but in the design world, you have seen multiple paradigms. For example, when I was coming of age as a designer, we transitioned from where we were doing literal paste ups, where it was stuff that was adhered to a cardboard that would then actually be photographed, um, to desktop publishing, right? And so desktop publishing all of a sudden made our process super fast.
And we're talking about not that long ago. We're talking
30,
well, early 90s.
30-ish. Yeah.
Okay. That was
Yep.
like the
Late 80s, early 90s.
okay.
And so
Print Shop Pro.
yeah,
Yeah.
it really when you had the first Mac,
Mhm.
that kind of the Mac Classic,
Right.
that's really when it began to take off. There was already desktop publishing, right? In the early 80s. We had things like CorelDRAW, but you weren't really doing desktop publishing with that so much as you were doing like vector art that would get cut.
So you talked while we're back in the early 80s, I mean, that was a big revolution in art as well. So
Right.
we had to transition from, into the first, digital art.
Right. We definitely began seeing traditional art. I would say that started certainly in the 80s where we began seeing digital art. It became a little bit more prevalent
And I
in
bet people didn't think that that was art.
no, it was definitely questioned because,
Right.
what kind of skill is involved,
Yeah.
and
Probably the same with digital photography back when they
so
went from
yeah,
and probably from from paintings to photographs,
so
right?
so I would argue that the differentiation is craft, right? So when it comes to creating artwork, does the medium matter? And does it matter how much the artist crafted that medium? Did they actually have to get substrate and pigments and mix it together in order to make their paints? Or did they buy it off the shelf? And does that change what type of artist and how good of an artist they are by the level of craft that they employ?
Did Picasso make his own paints?
Uh, Probably and probably not, right?
Right.
Because of that time,
Right.
you generally would have to mix your own paints. But
You couldn't just
regardless,
go down to Sam Flax.
again, not an advertiser, but a fantastic art supply store.
Colonial Drive, Florida.
So as far as the art is concerned, right? Like you were saying, digital art was not widely adopted until the turn of the century, and by turn of the century, I mean turn of the millennium into the 2000s, right? And so in the 2000s, we had already seen deviant art come up as a platform for digital art. Was it what you would find in a museum? No, but back in the 80s, there were very few museum quality digital art out there, right? I think Chuck Close may have done something. I have no idea. Don't quote me on that. But it was people like that, and April Greiman, I think was her name. So there were some digital artists that were noteworthy in that era, but it didn't become mainstream until decades later. And I think that's kind of where we are right now. We are on the precipice of generative AI going from being a niche space to something maybe 30 years from now. I would not be surprised to see displayed in a gilded frame in a place like the Metropolitan Museum of Art, for example.
The it's interesting to see these sort of inflection points where, I was just thinking about, digital versus, digital photography versus, analog photography
Yeah,
or chemical photography. And, the same goes in music with samples. And I mean, there was a
sure.
huge, controversy back in when sampling became popular and the legal ramification. It took years and still evolving as a law. The law is always trailing behind the technology, and seems to be getting further and further behind. And so it's important that we don't just look at what's legal,
Hmm.
that we look at what's ethical, and and from the research I've been doing, most of the ethics discussions. There's a lot of ethics discussions around the source of the data of where where these models are being trained. So, New York Times has filed a suit against OpenAI, and there's countless other lawsuits going around. And Suno is being sued for training
Mhm.
on music, and I'm sure there's many, many more about this training data,
Yeah.
which is sort of is separate from the use ethics. And so let's talk a little bit about the training data as you see it. We can both talk about the on
I
the
mean,
l-
this is definitely more of your
yeah.
wheelhouse.
Well, I was talking on like for example, on the legal side,
Sure.
you have a legal responsibility to your clients. You have they engage in an agreement with you. You're performing work on their behalf.
Right.
So you transfer a license to them that you don't transfer the whole, like, how does that licensing work today, not including generative AI? Like, if you just did a logo design and all that work
Mhm.
for a client, the old-fashioned way,
Yeah.
how does that on a
Well,
legal side, I'm
so,
talking.
on a legal side, an artist always maintains the copyright unless they explicitly sell the copyright.
Okay.
Um,
That's true of a photographer
yeah,
or yep, okay.
and so, what we do is, as a business, and this is a business decision,
Yep,
there are many businesses that do it way different from us,
yep,
but when we work with a customer, we believe what we're doing is for them and them alone, and so they get an indefinite license to
right.
utilize whatever it is that we provide to them in perpetuity. And that is until the death of the company or if they're acquired. And if they're acquired, then that license transfers in that acquisition. But that's not the case with every agency or designer. Some designers have limited licensing. And the same is true for photographers, right? A photographer might only do a 1 year allowance and might also limit the applications of said photo, right? So that photo might be something that you're only allowed to use on a website and in a print campaign and a digital campaign, and you can only use it for a year. Sometimes a photographer will just be like, "Here are the negatives. You can have whatever." Of course, figuratively speaking, no negatives, but
Mhm.
but you get the idea. So as far as the transfer of rights is concerned, it really varies from situation to situation.
So, so adding, if you're not the original artist,
Yeah,
in the case of AI generated something, that kind of puts that entire structure under a potential weakness,
it
right?
definitely does. Yeah,
Yeah.
which is, but it's not to negate the fact that there are times as designers, and this goes back to before the term graphic designer even existed, where the commercial artist would use a bank of clip art, right? And that clip art might be a book that they purchased that has royalty free, or it might be something that's licensed. It really depends. And they would literally cut it out. They would clip the art and paste it onto the pasteboard. And so did they originate that? No, not necessarily. They can use a book of illustrations. And there are all sorts of books like that, right? So that have dingbats and as Simon would call them, doilies, and just things that are beautiful finials and whatnot. Um, so where is it art? Where is it craft? And does that actually matter, right? I don't design all the typefaces that I use. I license them. And I license them from someone who is a type designer. And I think that's kind of akin to having an electrician and an apprentice and a whole team that is able to do wiring in a building. I think that the designer is just one of those uh, craftspeople that is involved in the creation and execution. So I don't know where I'm going in this
Right,
meandering
right.
thing, but really the big idea is I don't believe that generative AI is is negating what a designer's contribution is, right? Because I use typefaces, I use stock photography or photography from a photographer that isn't me. And so there are all of these elements that come together. So using generative AI, especially if it's using royalty free or licensed photography from which to create that media, I feel like that's not going anywhere that is a negative.
You mentioned typefaces, you know, who
Can we edit that section out? But yeah,
no. Uh, our fan demands that these appear unedited.
hi Calvin.
Speaking of, I just wanted to say we joke about that. We have more than one fan. And so if
But
you
Calvin is easily our biggest
yes.
fan.
And so if you see this and you enjoy this content, just write a comment or something in their YouTube feed or whatever, wherever you're seeing this,
And like and
and
subscribe.
you can do that too. But it just we'd like to know who you are because we'd like to cater this content to you guys.
So my big question to you, John, is so why are we even talking about the ethics of generative AI? Is there something that maybe we did that we
Oh,
might want to tell people about?
so I think that's what we're getting to. So as a result of this conversation, I went back to my house and had a conversation with AI about our conversation.
That's right.
And out of that conversation, I developed a sort of first draft of a
It was a matrix.
it was a matrix,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And I gave that to you, and then we sort of created a first draft of a document
Mhm.
that sort of helped guide us. It was really an exercise in us saying, I was like, well, I like to use Suno and make songs. Suno had some controversy because of did they ethically source the data? A lot of people are saying no. And so there's been lawsuits and there's been, they just made a partnership with Warner Music and stuff like that. Um, but we started talking about things like, well, intent and, does the intent matter? Does,
Yes.
yes, does, is it, how is the data sourced ethically? Like we started building out, what are these criteria? Like I said, Doug, what would it take for you to say yes? And so we sort of broke it down into this, realized that it couldn't really be a yes or no.
Right.
It's a scale, it's a range. And what is in very, very like, you're using it for social good, it's helping people, it's creating jobs.
Right.
It's
Again, the ethically
sourced
sourced. Yeah,
data. It's
exactly.
all of these things. How do we define that and can we
And
and
categorize, right?
categorize it and come up with a, I don't want to say standard, but a scoring system that we can just say, look at it quickly. Granted, it's never going to be perfect. We decided very quickly this is going to evolve, and so we're at what
2.5.
2.5 now, and
But it's finally ready.
it's finally ready. So
So we created this rubric and then we translated this rubric into a functional utility
yes,
that anytime we have any questions about the ethical application of generative AI, we can go in and use 5 different drop downs that answer 5 different categories of where the range is for ethical behavior. Obviously, it's never going to be foolproof. More importantly, nefarious actors can always exist. They don't give a shit about it being ethical.
Yeah, we
They're
kind of
not going to
talked.
use this tool.
We talked a little bit about that. It's like, well, if somebody is going to, I mean, we know that there are people out there already using it to create spam bots and steal your data and you know, there's create, you know, fake web pages and
Right.
all, you know, there's lots of
But this
nefarious
isn't
things.
this isn't about morality. This is about
Yeah.
ethics.
Yeah.
If you have the morality to be a positive actor, then this ethics scale
is
for you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think that's a good place to pause.
I think that's fantastic. You know what? We should talk about that on our next episode.
And I think this is the first of a series that we are going to be talking about the ethics of AI, specifically the scale and the different factors that we believe are important to look at when looking at AI ethics. So like and subscribe, and you can see part 2.
Thank you for tuning in to Brand of Brothers. Big thank you to our presenting sponsor, Remix, the branding agency, along with production assistance from Johnny Diggz, Simon Jacobson, and me, Doug Berger. We can't forget music by PRO. Speaking of not forgetting, remember to do that like and subscribe thing and find us at brandshowlive.com and follow us on the socials at Brand Show Live.